So today I want to get back into the paranormal, and this video is going to be about the Philip experiment. I'm going to give a brief overview of what it is, and then I want to just kind of bounce around some ideas about what the Philip experiment actually tells us. I'm pretty sure I first heard of the Philip experiment mentioned in a podcast or something, so I looked it up, and it's a very, very interesting study. And I think if it's real, and if its evidence is real, that it actually sheds a lot of light on paranormal as we know it. Before we get into it, I did want to say that my sources were all internet research based. I did not read a book on this. This is everything I've gleaned from doing internet searches. So I can't guarantee that all of it's 100% accurate, but just keep that in mind. I plan to read the book sometime soon and any other books that might exist on the subject, and I would encourage you to do the same too if you're really trying to find a conclusion of your own about this experiment. So what is it? The Philip experiment first began in 1972 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It was a parapsychological experiment conducted via the Toronto Society for Psychical Research. It was conducted by an A.R.G. Owen and overseen by psychologist Dr. Joel Witten with a group of 8 participants. And these participants were all reportedly very reputable people from the community. The purpose of this experiment was to create a fictional entity, a fictional spirit, and to communicate with it through seance. And I'm not exactly sure what their angle was, but to me this seems like it was more of a skeptical sort of angle. Like they're trying to say that we can create these phenomena with our mind, that it's not necessarily some outside entity. It's almost as if they were trying to support the argument that this is all in our heads. But anyway, the sources that I checked said that these people conducting the experiment wanted to prove that the human mind can create spirits. So the group created Philip. They designed this character and gave him an entire backstory. Philip was born in 1624 in England and died in 1654. They created a whole biography for him with lots of different little details about his life and his death. So now that they created Philip, it was time to try to reach him via seance. And as with many mystical traditions throughout history, this exercise took a lot of commitment and consistency. So apparently, according to the sources, the group met regularly, I think it was once a week, and talked about Philip, discussed Philip, meditated on Philip, sat and visualized Philip, just did exercises together to try to reach him, and didn't get any real results. So from there, the group decided to kind of make more of a traditional spiritualist seance setting. So they dimmed the lights, got candles, all that kind of stuff, to really kind of set the mood, to make it seem more like a seance than a lab, I guess. They also surrounded themselves with imagery related to Philip, so objects or pictures from that time period, and they even had a drawing of what Philip looked like, so I think that's one of the items they had set out for the seances. In my research, I was unable to find exactly how often they met and how long their meetings were, but I would guess it was at least once a week for at least an hour. It could have been way more than that. It could have been less, but regardless, the point is that they did it regularly and they really did devote time to it and like made it into a routine. So after they tried to make it a little more spiritual in terms of their setting, Philip began to communicate with rapping and knocking. If you know anything about spiritualism, it would be sort of the standard kinds of communication you would get in a seance. He was able to answer various yes or no questions related to the backstory they had created for his life. So, you know, if they said, for example, were you 30 when you died? He would say yes, like knock twice for yes or whatever. kind of answer system they had set up. So he was able to confirm, whoever they were talking to was able to confirm the details from Philip's imaginary life. The conductors of this experiment thought that that knowledge, those answers, came from the collective unconscious of the group who had that knowledge in their unconscious, subconscious, unconscious. And from then on, they continued the experiment, and the answers the responses got a little more noteworthy. They would have experiences such as lights dimming, the table even moving or tipping. They never got any visual apparitions, which is one of the goals that they really wanted to achieve, was to get something visual. They also didn't get any auditory evidence, although some of the participants would say they thought they could hear whispering. There was nothing really concrete. But as they communicate with him over time, it really seemed like they were getting Philip's personality. They were talking to a personality, somebody with likes and dislikes. Aside from the knowledge about Philip, he had a personality behind it. The Philip experiment gained popularity, and they even did a live seance on TV. I couldn't find real clips of that seance. I found reenactments from documentaries, but I don't think I have found the actual footage. Apparently, things happened during the seance that they did live, but the footage couldn't capture it because of the lighting or whatever. So even that's kind of iffy. So that's the rundown of what the Philip experiment was. Although they didn't quite get the extreme responses that they were hoping to get, such as visual apparitions, I think that this experiment, assuming that this is all true, is really, really extraordinary. I know, obviously, there have been probably hundreds and hundreds of faked seances throughout history. I'm very, very aware of that. I know there are several tricks and various manipulations to fake results in a seance. I know. But let's just assume that the Philip experiment was legit and nothing about it was faked. So what would this tell us? One of the websites I looked at was time-loops.net. That website quoted, "Since ghosts and spirits are generally believed to belong to dead persons, the invented ghost experiment should not have had success." So, who were they talking to exactly? Philip wasn't real, so they weren't talking to the ghost of Philip. But that doesn't mean they weren't talking to a ghost. It could have been some sort of a dead person passing by, saw these seances were happening, wanted to have a chance to talk. It could have been some sort of non-human trickster spirit, even a little mischievous demon of some kind, if you want to categorize all these things we don't understand. And I mean, who's to say that any spirit can't have access to this biography of Philip that we made up in our heads? So yeah, doesn't mean they weren't talking to a ghost, but really doesn't mean they were talking to a ghost either. One website I looked at even wanted to entertain the idea that the seance creates a perfect opportunity for someone from the future to communicate with us from the past, because in this seance environment, it's not altering history, the course of history. I'm not sure how I feel about that, I guess, but why would someone from the future pretend to be Philip and answer yes or no questions? You know what I mean? But let's talk about the theories that interest me personally. So let's think about poltergeists for a second. Poltergeists are known for being physical, moving things, knocking, rapping, things like that. And traditionally, poltergeists are known to be created unconsciously due to emotions and whatnot. I won't get into that, but this got me thinking, can you create a poltergeist consciously? What if they just created themselves a poltergeist, which is, it's from you made it, and it still kind of has a mind of its own in that it will knock on things and pound on things and stuff like that. I mean, is that a possibility? But then again, it's not really a poltergeist, is it? Because Is a poltergeist kind of like a full-time manifestation that's haunting a space? Because I'm sure that lab space wasn't haunted when the participants weren't there. I mean, stuff's only happening when Philip is being called upon, from what I understand. So, is this maybe some kind of weird psychokinesis? Are they kind of making the sounds happen, making the table move from their own minds, and it's not a separate entity of any kind doing this? Okay, next interesting theory is, you've probably heard of it if you're into the paranormal at all, it gets thrown around a lot these days, the concept of a tulpa, the thought form, the entity that we intentionally create that takes on an existence of its own. It is possible that they created Philip and made him real. So Philip is real because they gave him life or death. And something that I've been thinking about a lot after reading all of this is like, okay, so think about you have a seance and you want to contact Aunt Sally who's dead. And you have this seance and you want to be like, okay, well, to prove you're really Aunt Sally, like, tell me something that only you would know. And then you get that confirmation and then you're convinced that it's Sally. I just don't think we can rely on that. Because Philip could confirm those questions. Well, if you're really Philip, then tell me the name of your crush or something like that. And he was able to respond. But we know that wasn't actually Philip we're talking to. But he still had all the right answers. You know what I mean? So what do any seances tell us? They don't tell us that we're actually talking to who we think we're talking to. It's just blowing my mind. Another thing that really kind of inspires me about this experiment is you can make almost anything happen with consistency, concentration, and dedication. So the fact that they really committed to this experiment and didn't quit and kept going, even when nothing was happening, they kept doing it, stuff can happen. And I think group prayer and group visualization and anything really that you are so consistent with can really get results. I think that is so cool. There's a book that I haven't read, but I've listened to interviews about, and it's called The Power of Eight by Lynn McTaggart. And this book is about a study done with 8 people, basically doing group prayer and trying to measure results to see if group prayer actually achieved things. And I think she gave some pretty compelling evidence to suggest that group prayer, over and over consistent, focused, concentrated, can get results. So the Philip experiment is just another example of how dedication can maybe make even the craziest things happen. Another thought that crossed my mind is that I can't help but think about, in a seance, if everyone has their hand on the table and the table might move, it's similar to how if you're using a Ouija board and everyone's got their little fingers on the planchette and it moves. Is it something about us touching things? And is the movement of a table the same as the movement of a planchette? How much of a part do we play in this? Is the table still tipping if they don't have their hands on the table? I don't know. It's just another thing to think about. So what happened at the end of the Philip experiment? Like many paranormal or parapsychological experiments, results were inconclusive. The experiment was criticized for lacking solid controls and providing ambiguous results due to the unreliability of seances. And it didn't prove anything. It didn't give any explanation to us. But for me, I think it's still really significant because it does get you thinking a lot. In following the Philip experiment, some groups did do copycat experiments, which also produced results, however inconclusive. But this kind of exercise was able to be replicated. So honestly, I think the Philip experiment could kind of support the skeptics, but also kind of support the believers. And it just kind of makes me wonder if ghosts, seances, spirits, if any of that is what we think it is or what we want it to be. But in this field, you really don't get any answers, but that's part of why it's fun. I think it's important to theorize and wonder and imagine and consider all different angles and just kind of accept the fact that nobody's going to tell you, nothing's going to prove to you what the truth is. You just have to keep looking. For further reading, there is a book called Conjuring Up Philip. It was written by Iris Owen and Margaret Sparrow. I have not read it, but these two authors were participants in the experiment, I believe. Apparently, the movie The Quiet Ones was also loosely inspired by this experiment, which is cool. I haven't seen it. What do you get from this experiment? What are your thoughts? What are you feeling about it? Basically, you get a group of people, you make up a ghost, and then you talk to the ghost with a seance. And the ghost interacts with you even though you know the whole time it's not real. So who's interacting with you? Is it just you? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts, because I haven't been able to talk to anyone about this, and I'm interested to see what the world thinks about the Philip experiment. If you have any other paranormal topics you want to talk about, you want me to make a video about, let me know. And that's it for tonight.